Hi everyone. Welcome to another session. So far we've covered a lot and we said that this video for you to fully benefit, you need to start watching it from the oldest to the most recent, and don't forget to keep liking, sharing and commenting on our videos. We appreciate, and also subscribe. Don't just watch, but make sure you subscribe. So we started off with high trust. We've covered a lot, an overview on high trust, went through internal and external assessment, the different type of assessment, R2, I1, and E1. And we said R2 is the most comprehensive form of assessment where organization want to go through that. Even their maturity level ranges from 1 to 5 score or scoring, while I1 is more of like a moderate, and then E2 is a fundamental. And they are also transversible, means that you can start with E1 to I1 to R2. And also, especially for like startup companies who maybe they might don't really know what they have in place, they can start with, E1 or small businesses, and then in the long run, they might go in for the ISO certification. That being said, this slide today will just go over the life cycle, or if like over the overview of to perform an R2 validated assessment. Remember, we spoke highly, or we talked so much on the readiness and the validation. And readiness is more of the access entity, that's the in-house organization. While talking of validated assessment, now we start talking of the third-party organization or external auditors or assessor. And don't forget the fact that it doesn't matter if you have internal assessor within your company. A company will have a minimum of two, one that have is professional certified, high trust, and also the QA. And likewise for external companies, they might have a minimum of five with three certified practitioner and two QAs. So going through the overview of the validated assessment, let's go through the different or the flow chart or the steps, okay? It says that HITRUST R2 validated assessment workflow consists of 16 phases, which must be performed sequentially. Each phase is assigned to either the assess entity, the external assessor, as well as HITRUST or the HITRUST PMO. So you have three bodies or three different designated team of folks working to achieve the R2 certification, because we are going through the validated means, you must have gone through the readiness and then validated you are seeking or wanting to have your high trust certificate. And completing this phase in the proper order ensures that the organization will be prepared for high trust certifications. And with that, we will just go through and try to put it on read mode. Okay. So, and with that, if you look at it here, we're going to break it down. We'll go through the different phase, but just to take a quick look as to what the thing entails first, if you look at the color code legends, where it says that green actually talks on the access entity, this color, I don't know if it's dark, whatever, talk about the external auditors or assessor, and then red for high trust themselves. And you had the first two steps, once an organization have gone through the readiness, now to start the validated process, then you go to my CFS, high trust my CFS, which is an automated tool that will allow you to start answering those questions. First of all, tell us what is scope, what you're looking for, right? What kind of assessment you're looking for. For example, answering pre-assessment, answering assessment. So you have the pre-assessment, then you have the assessment. So once they've done all of those, and don't forget the fact that you must have completed your readiness already, right? After that, then you go through the validation option, validated by an external assessor. Once that has been validated, it means they were assessing your controls, checking your artifacts, scanning your system, and all those things. Once it's been validated and look at what they're going to do, they come now with a correction action plan, like findings, things that needs to be corrected. And once that is like, they'll give it back to you guys, things that need to be corrected, because if they're scanning, they check everything, they give you more of like your inherent risks, look at your findings, and then create that correction action plan, send it back to you. Once you guys are done, correct everything, then guess what? In the course of doing that, you also sign the rep letter Then the review of, then once you must have remediated whatever findings that they gave you guys or the caps, then it goes back to the external assessor where they'll have to review the caps. And once they review the caps, then you now switch it to high trust. High trust will also start by first of all performing checks. You understand? So at this point, before you send it to high trust, external assessor must make sure that you guys are really good, right? So once they start performing the checks, and then they'll check if everything is in line with high trust standard. If not, they'll also send out, a tax. That's they call it that, a check-in tax, where external auditors will have to address those tax. And once they've addressed it, guess what? They send it back to high trust, where high trust will have to review pending check tax. So based on what they've done, so to check the tax, and then review pending check tax, and from then, it goes now to pending quality assurance, but we're going to go through each and every phases to see what it entails. And then now you have the QA, where they have to perform the QA. And once you go through the level of the QA, guess what? It also have any task that they have to address at the level of the QA. They send it back to the external assessor. Once the external assessor have addressed those tasks, send it back to high trust. High trust will have to review it, go to the pending QA task, and from there it goes now to preparing and reviewing deliverables. So once they've confirmed and said, guess what, everything is good, then it gets to this point, and that's where we come now to the draft review, where you have to review draft deliverables. So once they've prepared, they send it to, of course, the access entity, that's the organization will have to review draft deliverables, and guess what? It goes to revising draft and completion. Then the organization can achieve, its high trust certification. But let's say we have a diagram here. I mean, example of what those questions entails. For example, actually the pre-assessment, it says that the assess entity provide key organization information, assess options, scope, and factors. Actually, assessment, the assess entity respond to request statement and assign based on high trust maturity model. Remember, if you're going now, we are talking about R2. Now we start talking about the maturity model from 1 to 5. But if E1 and I1, then we talk of, maturity at the level of implementation of the controls, correct? I remember R2 certification lasts for 2 years, while the other one lasts for 1 year, right? And then for performing validation, external to validate the responses provided by the entity, imputing, enter the correction action. So these are things that we've covered already, but just have, we just simply highlighted all of these, and then the responsible parties, who is responsible for doing what, and the description of the task or the phase, right? This literally covers everything that we've covered already. Okay. But okay, so at this point, let's say answering pre-assessment, the pre-assessment phase. They say in this pre-assessment phase, the assess entity create a new assessment objects in my CFS and enter key preliminary information to guide the assessment process. This phase involves completing the following pre-assessment web forms, for example, name and security, organization information, assessment options, scope of the assessment, the first scoring profile factors. Once these three are completed, my CFA generate the assessment and the process can continue to the next phase. But don't even worry, because apparently you guys know I like to go granular. So we've been able to break each and every aspect that we've listed, right? Say, for example, we'll talk about name and security. Do you see? So in the very first pre-assessment phase, organization have to answer the name and security. But what does that entail? And this is like a sample question. For example, what is the name of your organization, right? Who is responsible for security within your organization? Please provide contact details. What security measures are currently in place for protecting sensitive information? Do you see? So those are just questions that the process entity or your organization will be responding based on what you guys already have in place. Or maybe tell me, is it that you don't remember your company's name? So do you see? So it's not something that is difficult, something that you cannot do. And that's why we have this screenshot that said answer pre-assessment, answering assessment, and then perform validation, right? Then for answering pre-assessment, again, we have sample question, that's organization information. Remember, we listed a couple of them. The first one, we talk of name and security. Do you see? We talk of name and security. We'll provide a sample question. Let's go to organization information. Sample question: what is your organization full legal name, address, and contact details? Yes. Is your organization a public or private entity? It's very important, right? Public, private, and then you know what kind of controls that needs to go through your system. What is the size of your organization in terms of employees and data processing capability? So that's an example. And then, for example, assessment option. What type of HITRUST assessment are you pursuing? You see, that's why I talk about assessment options. And we have three different types. So do you want to go for an E1? Do you want to go for an I1? Or do you want to go for an R2? Do you require additional options such as reporting on artificial intelligence or hyper compliance? Would you like to include any authoritative sources such as the NIST, ISO, or any other sources? So if you want to include that, then you definitely add. Then scope of the assessment, sample questions, which system, departments, or locations are involved in the assessment. Now, that's why scope, in scope, okay, within. Are there any specific exclusions you want to define for this assessment, e.g. third-party providers? How will the assessment be scoped across different geographic regions, if applicable? So again, those just question and answer. And then we have the answering pre-assessment HITRUST. Also, we have the default scoping profile. For sample question of default scoping profile, I said, which scoring profile will you apply to this assessment, e.g. basic, advanced? Do you see? Are there any specific exception to the default scoring profile you would like to implement for certain system or controls? Will this assessment involve a focus on high risk area within your organization? So those are questions that I need to ask. And for factors, we're also going to cover it in detail sometime in the future. What compliance regulations, e.g. HIPAA, GDPR, NICE, NIST, PCI DSS, should be considered in this statement? Are there any specific industry standards or best practices you want to include as factors in the assessment? What is your organization risk tolerance level, and does that impact the assessment criteria? So once you're done with that, then you go to answering pre-assessment, right? Answering pre-assessment, answering assessment. So once you've answered the pre-assessment, then you are going now to start answering assessment. Do you see? We've done with answering pre-assessment and then answering assessment, then before we go to the validation step. So answering assessment, that's a HITRUST validated assessment phase. And this is the second phase now. So we see just a recap of the first phase where we'll go through like basic information, basic pre-assessment questions, where we have to answer organization, name, security, responsible party, public or interface or internal, just stuff like that, scoping, what is involved before scoping, are we going to go with any authoritative sources or not? We have to specify those. And then why in the answering assessment phase, the assess entity must accurately respond to each requirement statement in the assessment based on the HITRUST control maturity model. This step include one, use the control maturity scoring rubric, right? The assess entity uses this rubric to determine scores for each control maturity level across the assessment. So do you see? And that's why we have the rubric that you have to determine or assess it based on the scale of 1 to 5, 5 of course the highest, and then determine on the functionality or efficiency of those controls. Then still on answering assessment, we have one that we have to address. For example, what if something is not applicable? Remember, when you go to the maturity level, it's not like all those controls are applicable for your system. You have situations where controls aren't applicable for your system. For example, if a requirement statement is marked non-applicable, the access entity or organization provides complimentary in the subscriber comment field in the my CSF, right? So when you are open that complimentary or provide complimentary, it's just like a rationale or tell me why is that control not applicable. You got to explain it, explaining why the requirement is not applicable to the scope of the assessment. So you just got to explain it to me. and tell me why it's not applicable. Let's see a typical example for a controls that might not be applicable, say for our system terms or any organization system. So during the high trust assessment, one of the security controls asks the assessed entity to demonstrate that they have encryption mechanism in place for data transfer over a public network. That's transmission data in transit. Well, we'll start talking of TLS 1.3, or that's the most latest version out there, right? I believe so. You got to double check, right? However, the company's network does not utilize public-facing sensitive or services that require encryption in transit, right? As all sensitive data is strictly handled within internal system and never transmitted over the network or internet. So if it's an internal system where it's been housed or dwell in your local area network, it's not no data is being transmitted over the network, right? So why do we want to implement data in transit, like encryption standard or algorithm? It doesn't make any sense, right? And that's why if it's something internal, then that control absolutely is not applicable. And that's why applicable requirement, the assess entity mark this requirement as not applicable because it does not apply to their system, which is entirely internal and does not require encryption for public network transmission. So this is a valid reason. So we have 100% right to say that, what, this control is not applicable for our system, and this is the rationale, this is our reason as to why we make such claim. The next one, complementary, say in the subscribe comment fee in my CFS, address entity explain the reason for marking the requirement as not applicable. So this is what we have. The requirement is not applicable because our organization, so I kind of try to personify it based on our term system, right? It's not applicable for our term system, because term does not transmit sensitive data over public networks. All data transmission occurs within a secure internal network where encryption is managed through alternative security controls for data at rest. Therefore, encryption for public network transmission is not required in our environment, right? And then we have HITRUST review. HITRUST will review the provided complementary to ensure the justifications aligns with their standards. If the justification is valid, the requirement will remain marked as non-applicable. So the fact that we have made that claim doesn't mean that HITRUST will just automatically embrace our claim or just validate our claim. No, each time we are making those claims, that's something that we also want to verify, check to make sure our claims are valid, or our claim is valid. So if such claim is valid, then of course they have to verify, make sure that we can properly map the control as non-applicable. Then the next one is okay. So the next one is answering assessment, right? Okay, we also have resolve potential quality. What does that mean? So the first one we'll talk about marking non-applicable, and then this one resolve potential quality issues, right? PQI. So if any potential qualities are triggered, the assess entity follows the recommendations or chooses to override the issue with an explanation. All overriding PQIs will be subjected to HITRUST QA review. But let's see a typical example as to what this entails. It says that during the assessment of a company's HITRUST compliance, a potential quality issue is triggered because the evidence provided for one of the security controls, specifically for access control, let's just say access control for now, requirement does not align with the documentation standards set by HITRUST. The evidence is not sufficiently detailed and lack key elements such as access control logs, for a 6 month period, which are required to demonstrate compliance. So maybe whatever thing we are doing, we are provided our artifacts and all those things. It really doesn't meet HITRUST required standards. Say they want to get logs, access logs within a period of 6 months. But what if our retention policy says that we only retain logs in 3 months? The HITRUST have put their standard as to 6 months. So what happened? So let's see the resolution aspect. The access entity reviews the feedback and follows the recommendations provided by HITRUST assessor to rectify the issue. They collect the missing access and control logs for the required 6 month period, organize the data according to HITRUST documentation standards, provide a more detailed explanation of how access control policy and enforced within their environment. Maybe they didn't send all the, how they call, logs for the past 6 months, but again, based on HITRUST standard, that's what they're gonna do. And they said they want to rectify the issues. But let's see, when can this be overwritten, right? We talk of overwrites, but let's say override, what happens in this section? If the company is unable to retrieve the logs, remember resolution, we talk of resolve potential quality issues. So the resolution may be based on their standard, that's something that we can do. But what if this thing doesn't align with our own policy, our own retention policy that we have in place? What is going to happen? That's why they said if a company is unable to retrieve the logs due to technical limitation, for example, a system that no longer retains logs for more than 3 months, they may choose to override the issue by providing a detailed explanation of their retention policy and why this limitation exists. They also provide compensatory controls, such as more frequent audits and monitoring to ensure access control mechanism or access control remains secure, right? And that's why, remember, this is an override action. If we want to override this thing, maybe, right, at this point, this system, our retention policy is 3 months. We don't have retention policy up to 6 months. So after the 3 months, everything is being purged and deleted, or, they are erased, right? But if HITRUST wanted us to provide a 6 month access logs, then this is something that if we have to choose the option of overriding it, then we also have to provide what our policy says and with the rationale as to why we are opting, want to override this, right? And now they say HITRUST QA review. Once a company submit a revised evidence and explanation, HITRUST quality or QA team reviews the overriding PQI and the correction action taken to ensure they meet the required standards. If everything is in order, the PQI is resolved and the assessment process continues. Do you see? So you choose the option of either you want to overwrite it or you guys can resolve it. But if it's been overwritten, then guess what? You also have to back it up with your rationale. Still, we have optional actions. The access entity can book a QA reservation. At this point, it makes sense, right? QA, quality assurance reservation, and begin the process of completing the validated agreement web form. But let's see a typical example. Say, for example, during the HITRUST R2 validator assessment process, the access entity or the organization has completed their primary assessment, but is continually taking additional steps to further or better validation. Optional action. The access entity decide to book a QA reservation to ensure that their quality assurance process is confirmed and to gain more assurance regarding their compliance status. By doing so, they also initiate the process of completing a validated report agreement web form. Explanation. These options or option action allows the entity to enhance the quality of the assessment by undergoing a more thorough review, providing an additional layer of verification for their compliance status. The QA reservation is scheduled and the web form is completed to finalize the process, confirming the entity readiness for external validation. So you have that right to reserve, make that reservation, just come again, just be more proactive to make sure you have everything so that once you initiate the process, at least you have the confidence that everything can go on smoothly, right? But if they have me and you that we already know security, you can read and understand. We don't need to spend that additional money. We can do everything and make sure we got everything, okay? But it also depends if the organization is not so sure what they want to do, or they have a specific time limit. They don't want a situation where you go through the external assessor, create correction action, and all those things, right? Maybe you just want to make sure once we are going, we are ready, everything can just, pass 100%. Then we move to the next phase, that's performing validation. I said the external assessor validate the information provided by the assess entity, right? So the external assessor will have to validate the information provided now. You see, so we've gone through the pre-answering phase, the answering phase you've answered. So once you've answered the external, now we'll move to the next phase where the external assessor will be the one to validate. And what are some of the key steps? One, review and approve pre-assessment assessment sections, link documents to required statements. Of course, now make sure you have all the necessary artifacts documents attached to any required statement. Address any trigger process quality indicators. We already spoke on that, right? If you have anything, anyone that is there, make sure it's been addressed. Ensure all required document is properly linked and reviewed. The one in situation, we're going to see a couple of examples. The one is situation where you say you have to upload incident response, maybe you don't have it, you just have, like, you know, you have maybe your stuff is kind of broken, you don't have a complete, you've not uploaded the most current article or document or artifact, and they are not linked. So they have to be linked to each statement. Just say, for example, a SOC 2 assessment. So SOC 2, that's something I'm going to go in depth for third-party vendor risks. The external assessor will validate that the entity has appropriately documented security controls, and these are appropriately aligned with the defined standards. Okay, so once we've gone through the validation, now we also want to perform validation. Remember, so everything you have the pre-entry, answering, and then we have still performing validation. So this is just something that we covered. Once you go through the answering phase, you perform the validation, and then once they've created, that's the external assessor, once they've created the caps, that's correction action plans, of course, send it back to you or your assess entity before you guys you think of resolving that, and then sign the rep letter. But says the access entity must complete the validated report agreement and rep letter. Key aspect, impute the required caps to my CSF. Ensure all caps meet reviewed criteria before submission. Of course, you must have taken care of everything. Then sign the management representation letter or rep letter. For example, say if a company discovers non-compliance with data encryption standards during HITRUST assessment, they will create a cap detailing their remediation step, then submit for review and as well as approval. We're talking about rep letter. What does it stand for? What is a rep letter? A rep letter or a management representation letter is a formal document used during audit or assessment. Okay, it is signed by the organization management assess entity to confirm that all information provided in the assessment or audit process is accurate and complete. In the context of HITRUST, the rep letter signifies the organization commitment to comply with necessary standards. Do you see when we say they create like caps, they send it, you have to do all the things. So you are doing all that and then signing the rep letter to make sure, what, I have successfully remediated or completed my task as aligned based on the requirements or guidance that you all provided, right? Acknowledging its responsibility for the information provided, assets that are not they are not material misstatement. Typically, the rep letter is signed by key personnel such as senior management, executive, or part of the final stage of the assessment process. It's a crucial element in demonstrating the integrity of the company's reporting and as well as assessment process. We already talked about imputing caps, right? Imputing cap and signing cap letter. Yeah. Then going through inputting caps, we've already talked about it, right? First, if they discover any things that need to be corrected, the external assessor will send it back to the assess how they call the assess entity or the company, and the assess entity will have to correct that and then sign the rep letter, right? And then the concept being that, guess what, they have to review, because once you claim that you've done, you've submitted it, then of course send it back where the access team will have to review the caps, right? External also review the caps linked to assessment, for example, approve or disapprove cap using the thumb up or thumb down button in my CFF, and then cap review completion updates requirement. For example, a cap might be disapproved if it lacks sufficient data on how the company plans to fix the caps in their management framework. But let's see something. Say, for example, a company discovered that a current encryption method for sensitive data in transit does not fully comply with the latest cybersecurity or security standard during their HITRUST assessment. To address this, the company create correction action, not them really created it. Let's just say the CAPS or the assessor have discovered it, created a correction action plan, aligning how they plan to upgrade their encryption protocol and implement additional training for staff, right? CAP review, the external assessor review the CAP link to the assessment. Upon reviewing, the assessor finds that the CAP include a timeline for upgrading the detail about the additional training session, but lacks sufficient milestones and key performance indicators. We're going to see the difference between KPIs as well as POEM, because remember, I also mentioned POEM when we're going through the RMF training, but we'll see, I think the next slide covers that. To measure the effectiveness of the new encryption methods, actions, what would the external assessor do? They disapprove the cap using the thumb down button in my CSF, and then because the cap does not provide enough data on how progress will be measured and what specific outcomes are expected from the changes, the company is notified that they must revise their cap to include measurable milestone and provide more specific information on encryption improvement. Once the revision are made, the external assessor will review it again for approval. So again, before going to the next step, we make sure so that everything has been covered. But let's see the differences between KPIs and POEMs, because I know when we covered the RMF training, we went through POEMs, and now we are talking about KPIs, I believe key performance indicators. I believe you all must have across this statement. KPIs, they said, first, they are measurable values that demonstrate how effectively an organization is achieving a key business objective. In the context of CAPS, KPIs will be used to track progress on specific actions. For example, how well the new encryption protocol is performing, how many staff members have completed the training. KPIs help assess the success of an action plan and ensure that the intended improvement are being made. You understand? So again, just a way to tell you, you know what, give me the milestone, but how effective the organization were able to do that. While on the other hand, POEMs, plan of action and milestones, a document used to describe the actions organization would take to correct deficiencies identified during security assessment or audit. POEMs outline what will be done, who is responsible for doing what, the timeline, and specific milestone. They are used to track progress on resolving vulnerabilities or non-compliance issues. A POEM typically includes the planned actions, target dates for compliance, and interim steps, right? If you're not able to do it. For example, why KPI measure the effectiveness of actions and documents, POEM align the actions as steps that will be taken to address non-compliance or security issues or weaknesses. So in a nutshell, a POEM could have KPI attached to it to track progress and success. For instance, a POEM might outline the step to implement a new encryption system, right? And KPI will be used to measure the success of the implementation. So number of system upgraded, speed of deployment, compliance with new encryption standard. But POEM will even go as further as giving you the implementation narrative or statement, right? And just created something where you all can see, just a dashboard or a screenshot of how the POEM might look like. For example, you might have 20 current issues. 8 of those current issues has been resolved, and then you have 60 issues that are overdue the past 60 days. For example, you have the POEM of patch management gap. It was created on February 8, 2024, milestone, implement automatic milestone. But this is just a basic overview because it goes as far as listing the responsible party, the expectation timeline as to when that will be completed and all those things. Then we've talked so much about correction action plan caps. Say, for example, we have a total number of caps, that's 35. And then, so 75% of caps have been resolved, where we have 12% that needs to be, that have been overdue. For example, we have the cap ID, say outdated encryption, and it was created on January 10, 2024. Was the responsible party, that's IT security team, is due on 07 January 28, 2024. What is the status of this? Is on track, and the KPI implemented give us a 95% score. But let's look, for example, say this phishing awareness training, right? You have, it was created on these days, responsible party is HR, but you see, it's just like 50% completed. And guess what? Look at the timeline, right? Or better still, we have a vulnerability scan that need to be like need to we need to scan our critical systems. It was created this date. Guess what? We'll have up to 1 year, because again, we want to do all our system. Say security operations team, but no scanning completed yet. So in respect of the fact that we have an initial date or a creation date, it doesn't mean that that went into effect, right? And that's why, you look at these caps, you can come now with a solution as to what organization needs to do. So once we've gone through that, the next one now is performing the checks. Where performing the checks, the HITRUST perform an automated quality assurance review of the system. What are some of the key steps? First, they'll assess documentation and web forms, review tasks identified in the checking process, and ensure unnecessary information is included for QA review. Say, for example, during the check-in process, the QA system might flag a missing document that is essential to a risk assessment process, delaying the validation. Do you see? You have reviewing tabs, check-in, performing checks in, addressing checks in, reviewing pending checks in, right? So, but let's see, performing checks in. During the check-in process, HITRUST automatically QA system conduct a review of the system documentation to ensure everything everything required for the validation process has been put in place. For example, let's say the first one, that issue detected. The system flagged a missing security policy document that is essential for demonstrating compliance with required HITRUST control related to data protection. They already have the list of documents that, again, remember we talk of linking those documents to the various statement. So in the course of doing that, maybe there's a missing document, the system will flag it. And what's the impact? The absence of the document delays will definitely delays the validation process, as its QA cannot even complete their review without the critical information. So what will happen? The team quickly upload the missing document, and the automated checking process continue. The caps is updated to prevent future omission, right? And the validation process move further to completing the check-in review phase. Say, for example, that's a check-in review dashboard. Say, for example, we have encryption policy. Of course, it was uploaded. You have need a total number of 50 documents. 45 have been reviews. Missing document 5, right? And then for encryption policy, it shows that it is good. But guess what? When we come to incident response plan, actually our students, they are developing an IR policy right now. When it comes to an incident response plan, this is missing, right? Of course, has not been uploaded. So that's why I say it needs to be uploaded. And you see the icon here. So we have a missing document. So which means that reviewing task identified using. So at this point, it means that the system has flagged that. And then when it comes to security access log, that was completed. Vendor security report pending under review. Do you see like you have different icons? Data classification document is missing, also need to be able to upload the document. So that summarizes everything that we've covered so far. And then when you go to addressing checks in tags, say addressing check-in tags identified during the check-in process need to be addressed and sent back to HITRUST. Step includes ensure all tags flagged in the check-in phase are addressed. Do you see? So literally, like before you move from one phase to the other, anything that is being identified, missed or whatever, make sure it's being rectified before we can proceed. If not, then we can't even proceed to the next phase, right? And that's why I said each phase depends on the previews. So review and resolve any outstanding issues from the check-in process. And then, for example, if an issue with missing evidence for a control is flagged, the access entity will be asked to submit the missing document for further reviews, right? Do you see? Performing check-in, addressing check-in tasks, reviewing pending check-in tasks. Let's say a typical example. So during the check-in process of a HITRUST assessment, the automatic system flags certain issues that needs to be addressed before proceeding with validation. Scenario one, the incident response plan documentation is missing from the submitted evidence. We just covered that, right? The access entity received a notification from HITRUST that the incident response plan is required for compliance validation. Resolution, the entity upload a missing document, ensuring it aligns with HITRUST standards. And what's the outcome? Once the missing document is submitted, the task is marked as completed and the check-in process continues. Addressing check-in tasks. Do you see? This is just exactly what we've covered so far. After that, now it still have to go through a review. And they say the HITRUST review all tasks addressed by the address entity or external assessor. So at this point, it could be the external assessor, get it out info or the Senate. But once that has been uploaded, then HITRUST will go as far as resolve any tasks that still need attention, move the assessment to the next phase once all tasks are being addressed. For example, after submitting a requested documentation, the access entity will await HITRUST review before even proceeding to the next stage. As I said earlier, you can move to the next stage without, the previous stage being pending or things have not been resolved. For example, said that in the case of missing document, the backup and disaster recovery plan document was flagged as missing during the initial review. The access entity upload a missing document for it to be reviewed by HITRUST, and they will have the pending task. This task is still marked as pending until HITRUST complete a review to ensure the document meets the necessary standards. So the fact that you submit it doesn't mean that it goes from one state to the other, right? For example, once you submit it will show pending. While they are still reviewing, go to the pending state. And once they finish reviewing it for pending state, it can go now to complete state, right? So HITRUST review the newly submitted document, and if document meets required standard, the task is marked as resolved. So you know what, go through the pending phase. If they've reviewed and everything looks good, then they can move it to resolve. What of incomplete evidence? Say the external assessor are missing, maybe request the missing detail from the access entity regarding the encryption standards. It will go through a pending tax again. The tax remain pending until additional information is being provided. It will still remain pending. Even when you provide the information, it will still remain the pending state, because while they are reviewing, it can be under review, which shows that it's still pending, right? Or it can go from once they send it, it's pending in review while they are reviewing. You know what? And then it can go now to resolve once everything works. Wow. You see? And this covers a whole lot to what we'll be discussing so far. Missing incident response plan, incomplete encryption policy, outdated vendor security policies. You see, key step, resolve, and la 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 la. So this simply tests all. Do you see? It's flag action required, upload and task complete, right? Then pending QA, so do you see again, this thing just makes sense from one step to the other, right? So first, HITRUST will also assign the assessment to the QA analyst for further review. The QA analyst will review all requirement documentation and assess compliance. Tasks requiring additional attention will be sent back for review. For example, a QA analyst might find that some control implementation details are insufficient, right? Promoting additional requests for classification from the access entity. That again, addressing check-in tasks, reviewing pending check-in tasks, pending quality assurance, and performing QA. Say, for example, the encryption implementation data is insufficient and specifically lacking information about encryption algorithm use and the frequency of key rotation. So HITRUST QA requests additional clarification from the access entity or even the external audit tools, asking them to provide more detailed information on encryption protocol and their implementation plan. So once the access entity submit the missing detail, the QA analysts review the updated information, ensures it meets the HITRUST standard and marks it as completed, right? Or complete. The assessment then move forward to the next phase after all pending issue has been resolved. So you can even just move from one phase to the other, make sure all pending issue has been resolved. Then from there now you can successfully move on to the next phase. And this gives us a summary of what we've covered so far. Tax discretion, encryption policy pending, phishing awareness training under reviewed, incident response plan pending, right? So make sure everything has been resolved before it could move, it could be moved to the next phase. And still now performing the QA. So once pre-assessment document, risk-based a sample of requirement system and CAT responses, address any significant issues during the QA phase. And again, you still performing, right? So verifying, the QA analyst will require that the access entity to submit a more detailed report. So it's just a back and forth go. And that's why I see some organization might just decide to have a QA reservation to prevent all this back and forth movement, maybe just to have everything, right? Because the back and forth, going back, submitting this, correcting this, it takes up a lot of time, right? It does takes time. And then for the performing QA, after perform QA, you address QA tasks and then you perform pending QA tasks, okay? And these are just like some of the things that we've covered. Again, once they assess it, once they identify it, they send it, rectify, resubmit it, go to under pending. If they check if everything is good, then they move to the next phase. If not, send it back. And the cost of doing that, once this has been done, then you're gonna have to prepare and reviewing deliverables. So this literally speaks for itself, right? Where they'll have to review any outstanding tasks and finalize the deliverables. Access entity will review the draft report and either approve or request revision, right? So, for example, after reviewing the draft report, an access entity might request revision related to risk mitigation plan that are unclear to the draft. So, if they are not too satisfied or pretty much the plan is not well explicit or their area where they feel like they need to understand better, then they can also have a draft, make sure everything is, simplified for them to have a good understanding, of their system. Say, for example, HITRUST first ensure that all outstanding tasks are resolved and included in the report. The missing documents such as incident response plan is uploaded before the draft report is finalized, right? So that is, we talk of draft, we didn't talk of finalize, or the final. So you still go through the draft aspect, but before even going through that, make sure all key docs, everything that we've listed, based on the HITRUST statement requirement, everything has been uploaded and they have been linked to those statements. The access entity reviews the draft report and identify area where further clarification is needed, specifically in section discussing risk medication. Access entity requires revision related to unclaimed risk medication plan in the draft, and then please verify how the correction action for risk medication will be tracked and provide a time of completion. So you see, HITRUST then incorporate the requested changes and send a revised report for final approval. Yeah. So it's just more of communication. There's literally nothing there, right? If you understand all everything that we've been discussing, then of course anyone can definitely get a job in this field and succeed. Do you see? Incident response plan review pending, request detailed roles and timeline for responses, data encryption in progress, asset control list, that's ACL list. This has been completed, vendor security is still pending. Do you see? Likewise, incident response that risk medication in progress. So you have all it. Then actual taking request clarification regarding this, clarify action for risk medication plan, approve added vendor compliance. So do you see that aspect when we said that if the access entity is not where maybe have some doubts going on, then they also have the right to ask for more clarity based on what HITRUST must have performed. And once that is done, then we go to the final stage that has to do with analyzing the draft, where of course, they say the access entity has up to 30 days to review and approve the draft. So once everything has been done, they send it to your access company, the access company or your organization, where they'll have up to 30 days to approve the draft, right? Approve the draft report or request a revision in my CFF. Ensure all the tools in the report are accurate and compliant with your system or with their system. Say the access entity might approve the draft after confirming that their data protection practices are clearly documented in the report. And then completing the assessment. So final reports are uploaded and the assessment is completed. Bravo, congratulations, right? The final report is reviewed and any additional compliance action are completed. The final report is published in my CFS. For example, once all correction and revision has been made, the final assessment report is completed and the certificate procession move forwards, right? So once they're done, certificates, then move forward, but we're still gonna go in detail. So that's the overflow for R2. Next video, we'll do an overflow or an overview for E1 as well as E1 as well as I1 validation assessment phases, right? So I'll see you all in the next video. And as I said, do not forget to like our videos. Do not forget to share with your friends. Do not forget to subscribe and just keep learning. And as you all know, we have a next cohort coming up in June and we cannot wait to see you guys. Bye.